Kwe, Upsaladagwe. Hello, welcome. My name is Neil Silcox. I'm the Faculty Excellence Lead here at the Maple Leaf Universities. I'm speaking to you from my home, which is in Kutupuktuk, Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Suzanne Sheffield. Suzanne LeMay Sheffield and I met during the Maple League Book Club long ago, before I was even connected with the Maple League. I just ended up in a book club, and Suzanne was there, and I knew her to be a warm and insightful presence. She always really cut to the heart of the matter. She was very caring, and I was always really happy to see her when I tuned in and she was there. And it was only later that I learned that she has over a quarter of a century of experience as an educational developer. And she's currently the executive director, acting, it says acting in brackets, but she's acting her heart out, at Dalhousie University Center for Learning and Teaching. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne Sheffield. Suzanne?
Thanks, that was such a lovely introduction. Thank you. Okay, so let's share my screen. All right, so thank you everybody for coming today. And I want to start by thanking Neil for giving me this opportunity to share with you. We met at the Dalhousie campus and had a great chat about this and many other things. It was a great example, Neil, of exactly what I'm going to talk about today, the importance of conversations. And before I get started, I also wanted to thank all the people who talk to us about their conversations, because that's informing what I'm going to talk about today. So I have to begin by highlighting the fact that the work that I'm sharing today was conducted with my own conversational partner in teaching learning, Dr. Anne-Marie Ryan, and we had 20 years of conversations until, unfortunately, in January of this year, she suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. But I want to acknowledge her in this work because she was a big part of it as well. So our interest in conversations began through our own conversations. We loved a good conversation for conversation's sake. There was a connection with another human being. There's the learning from someone else, practicing ideas in a safe but critical space, and stretching and growing and changing through that. And obviously in 20 years we did a lot of that. But I distinctly remember the one day we were sitting in a coffee shop and we were having a conversation, and Anne-Marie suddenly said, I wonder if other people have the same experience we do through conversation and how that works for other people. And we're like, oh my God, we have to find out. We have to find that out. And so we did. So while I'm talking to you today, I just have some thought questions that I want to share with you to start with, just that you can carry through the presentation with you. So if you already have a particular person you talk regularly with about your teaching, think about what connects you and what value those conversations have for you. And if a specific person doesn't straight away come to mind, think about what such a person might be like for you. And consider too that perhaps there actually already is such a person in your life, and that perhaps you haven't fully yet recognized the value of them to your teaching and learning and to your life in general. In fact, a number of the people that we talk to through the discussion, through our research about the nature of their conversations, noted to us that the conversation about their conversations actually made them more aware of just how valuable they were, more so than they had in the past. So give that some thought as well. So many years ago, I think it was in the 90s when I was still a graduate student, someone shared with me this cartoon that was supposed to represent academic life. And it was just a sketch of a row of closed doors. You might have seen it. It's come up again in different parts of my career. And I think, oh, there it is again. And it's supposed to highlight the separation and isolation that academics experience. And yet, for quite a while now, academics have been talking about conversations. This quote here from Parker Palmer demonstrates that he was thinking quite early on and sharing the idea that we need to improve teaching through conversations and through community. And he says, we must do something alien to academic culture. We must talk to each other about our inner lives. And I think that's really true. In 2005, Neil Haig from New Zealand wrote about everyday conversation as an impactful context for professional learning and development. He argued that conversations help new teachers to not only do the work of a teacher, but to grapple with the infinitely complex world of being a teacher. And I think that's so important to hold. More recently, others have written in various ways in various contexts about academic conversations, specifically how they relate to teaching. So Martinson and Roxa in Europe have looked at sort of networks of significant others for conversation, characterized by privacy, mutual trust, and intellectual intrigue. And they say these private conversations provide the basis for conceptual development and learning. Even more recently, Kate Thompson from Australia has looked at how venting incidents between faculty have been an avenue for continuing professional development. And she has subsequently done some work looking at how conversations can reinforce more formal professional development opportunities. And then Webb and Welsh really recently have talked about the importance of their conversations for the development of their identity as subtle scholars. And finally, I just wanted to share with you, there's a special issue on conversations in IJAD that just came out at the end of last year. It's called Conversations on Learning and Teaching, Changing Conceptions and Practice. And it's about 14 articles about the meaningfulness of conversations between faculty members and educational developers, between PhD students and their supervisors, early academic careers, between faculty and students. And they're all sort of looking at how we can use conversation to enhance professional development of teaching. So Emery and I were not the first to think about conversation. So for our research, we were specifically focusing on one-on-one partnerships. So two people who have found each other, chose each other without any obligations, no formal power differentials or hierarchy, although certainly sometimes one person had more experience in teaching or academia than another. But they come together to talk about their teaching, among other things, and have built deep and abiding relationships from these conversations. So I'm just outlining here some of the characteristics of our research. I do want to mention that we didn't have any racially visible colleagues volunteer to participate, and that's something I think we could do more research on. So we interviewed pairs together, we used guiding questions, we taped them to transcribe the interviews, and we drew themes from those, comparing and contrasting our respective viewpoints. And the conversations we recorded left us with very rich reflections that highlighted three things: how they found each other, what made the partnerships work, and the influence their conversations had on them and those around them. So, finding a conversational partner, where do you do that? I'm sharing a list here of the places that our interview participants shared that they found each other, and some of them are crossed with one another. I have to say, and this is not a very satisfactory answer if you're looking for a conversational partner, but happenstance was really key. Many of us may have been set up formally or informally with mentors, experienced networking opportunities or attended workshops and conferences where we met people. But it's not so much about finding someone who you think will strategically support or promote your career. It really is just about finding someone you like, someone who, when you meet them, you just know there's someone you'd like to know better, who can inform your thinking, and who you enjoy being in the company of. So one pair that met through a job interview said, "I knew right away that I wanted to spend more time with him and learn through his eyes what he brings to our unit." So, and we saw that a lot. Like the first minute they meet, think, "Oh, there's something there with that person." And I just read an article in Teaching and Learning Inquiry about a group of teachers who met at Aristotle conference, and they met sort of individually, and then they sort of collectively met with one another. And the same sort of thing, they just automatically knew, even though they were from all over the world, there was something there for them, and they wanted to know each other more. However, I would encourage the conscious seeking of, if you are looking for somebody, consciously seek it. Try and pay attention to when those moments come along. And Neil Haig has actually said that we need to move our understanding of the value of conversations from the tacit to the explicit as well. And I think that starts with finding a conversational partner. So, like many people in the pandemic, I've met a lot of new birds over the last few years, and these are a couple of them that have shown up this year. I have never had pigeons in my backyard before, but this year these two pigeons showed up on my back deck, and they come and visit me every morning. They're obviously really tight pair. They're almost always together. They sit really close, but sometimes they sit apart, and sometimes they squabble. Sometimes they coo. Sometimes they are so funny and entertaining. So I use this as a way to say that you might look for someone who's similar to you in a number of ways, but you don't just want that. You want somebody who you can disagree with and be comfortable disagreeing with, because it's in those disagreements we found where the sort of golden nuggets of change, ideas, and creativity can be found. And we all need to find a way to be open to criticism, to be able to critique and explore hopes and dreams together, to make those things become a reality. So the conversational partners we talk to shared values and worldviews, maybe professional practice, disciplinary bonds, teaching approaches, teaching philosophies. They shared those things, and they shared similarities about teaching. So one pair said, "Neither of us believe in memorization." Another said, we believe in the willingness to change. Another pair said, "Curiosity of spirit is our similarity, what brings us together." Some just said, "Well, we teach common courses." And another one said, "We try to get as many students as we can interested in our subject," because this was a person who didn't actually think their subject was that interesting. So like this was their mutual goal. And they tended to share similarities of personality too. So people said things like, "We don't clash, we don't feel threatened by one another, we have an excess of enthusiasm about teaching and learning, we like to do new things." One pair said, "Well, we're both in academia and we both have young kids, and that really gels us." But differences are really important as well. And this was reflected in the conversations we had. So there are different kinds of differences. So, there are gender differences, age differences, technological experience differences, those sorts of things. But people started to sort of contrast themselves. So one pair said, "Well, I'm dreamy and the other person's realistic." Or, "I'm fearless and the other person is scared to death." One person said, "I'm better able to ask questions and reflect, and so I encourage the other person to do more reflecting." One person said, "I'm more organized than the other." One pair said, "We both agree. I'm an absolute stickler on discipline in relation to students." And the other said, I don't harass them in that way. And so that makes us a nice blend, so we balance each other out in our conversations. Another pair said, "I get more stressed." And the other person said, "I definitely am usually the calmer head." And one person said, my partner's more of a planner, and I like to do things at the last minute. In fact, sometimes I'm changing things in the classroom as I go, and I'm fine with that. So contrasts and differences and similarities, and it all sort of gels together, but I think you need a balance of both. Yeah, so one thing that was held in common was some general shared values, and we gave them a sheet of values. These are the ones that came to the top. Probably unsurprising, because they would be true for any kind of relationship: openness, honesty, respect, trust, listening, encouragement, and curiosity. But there were a few others as well that I'll just share that were sort of one-offs, but they're interesting too. Ambitious, adventurous, and absolutely earnest. Humble and unpretentious. Collaborative. Positive. Authentic. Engaging confidentiality, that was very important for some of these relationships. Equality. Rapport. Patience, and commitment. So even though there were differences, there were shared foundational values that were held together and were important for the relationship to gel and to grow. Well, pragmatically though, despite all the sort of the happenstance and what have you, there needs to be a logistics establishing time and place to meet. And one of the key things seemed to be food. Food really brings people together, makes things less formal, more friendly. And one pair said, we meet where there's food and sweets. Sweets are a very important part of the deal. So food, obviously, in many cultures, for many of us, is a way to relax and bring people together. And this was true amongst the people that we talked to too. Meeting places, often public spaces that were sort of considered neutral. They didn't belong to one person or another. So coffee shops, pubs, clubs, lunchrooms. This is the Coburg Cafe on Coburg in Halifax. And this is Amory and I met here a lot. Sometimes they would seek private spaces if they felt that their conversation was going to be confidential and sensitive. So it depended. Sometimes meetings were planned, sometimes sporadic, sometimes spontaneous drop-bys. So one pair said, well, she'll come to my office just out of the blue, or I'll go to her office out of the blue, or we'll bump into each other in the corridor and just chat. So there's variation, but the meeting at some point fairly regularly was important. So while the meetings themselves are to some extent planned, the conversation more often than not wasn't. And that was so important to everybody. No plan. And in fact, Amory used to get very ticked off at me sometimes when, we'd be working on something together and I'd say, we need a plan and we need an agenda, we need to move this through. And she'd say, oh, okay, fine, but can we have another meeting at some point where it's just conversation, there's no plan. So maybe there's a vague sense of getting together. One pair said, I don't think either one of us ever knows exactly where we're going to end up. And the partner replied, we never know where we're going until we get there. But the process of getting to wherever there is was usually really important and valuable to each of the pairs. Another pair said, I think the meandering has always been really important to me. I think out loud. It's part of my thinking process, and their partner agreed. It's the same thing. So here are what we have sort of determined the shared characteristics of informal partner conversations are. I've talked about a number of these things already. Amory and I really like this idea of the image of the meandering river that had offshoots that falls back on itself. Doesn't seem to be going anywhere in particular, but we all know that a river ends up somewhere. So we kind of like that image, that metaphor for the kinds of conversations about teaching and learning that prompt change. One partner said, every single planned thing we've done has come out of the unplanned, and I think that's really important. So if you don't know where you're going and you don't have a plan, sometimes you can end up in very interesting places. And this approach allows for complex and interconnected, perhaps convoluted conversations that invite intellectual engagement, in emotional connection, in a social context. It promotes learning together. It promotes learning from practice. Several of our partners, and including Emery and myself, talked a lot about learning from literature and evidence-based practice versus learning through intuition and the wisdom of our experience, and how those things work and interact together, and how they then provide a platform for further exploration. One of our partners said, one of the things I've learned over the last couple of years is that I do have some wisdom. And she encouraged her partner to learn to rely on her experience more too, to trust herself and trust her gut when she knows something is right for teaching and learning. Another participant noticed, I think, intuition and literature sort of interplay with one another. So this sort of idea that you do what you intuitively feel is right, but then there's a desire, and we saw it in a lot of our partners, there's a desire to check in the literature, what are other people doing, and has that worked for them? And all of this seems to lead to risk-taking, creativity, the sharing of resources beyond the partners. I'll just share with you the influence of conversations in our teaching for the pair, and then for people beyond the pair. So intellectual engagement was very important, and the subject matters ranged phenomenally across pretty much everything you could think of in relation to teaching and learning. Some things were very specific, like new approaches to assessment, or creating a new lab, or student group work using portfolios, so sort of things like that. Some conversations were broader, student difficulties, using technology well, critical and creative thinking, of teaching those things. Some conversation topics were really all encompassing. So one pair said, those kinds of questions, the kind that cross different disciplinary boundaries, are really important for us. Another pair were looking at how to build community within science. Another were trying to keep up with the rapid changes in teaching and learning. And one pair said they talked about what we wish could happen in the university. All of these conversations definitely built confidence amongst the pairs that we talked to. And one person said having a bit more confidence pretty much benefits everybody. One person said, I'm not alone at all because we have a common goal. And inevitably, all of the pairs shared when things did not go well, when things went very well, and celebrated when there were successes. Another interesting thing about conversations, so far I've talked about sort of in-person conversations, but what Emery and I have found, and we found other people did too, is that between the in-person conversations, there were online conversations and sharing going on as well, which allowed for introspection and self-reflection in between meetings, which even further enriched the in-person meetings. And conversations went beyond teaching and learning. One person said, our conversations are scattered. We could talk about a couple of teaching things, then go into something more personal and social, stuff like that, and then we come back to where we finished off. And I think that that aspect of the conversation build the relationship, but also feed individuals' wellness as well. And so the conversations go beyond the two individuals. So sometimes they would actually teach a course together. Sometimes that wasn't possible, so they would bring each other in to guest lecture, find ways to make those connections. And of course, in doing that, they are then sharing what they've built together with their students. Others recognized that their own conversations were prompting conversations with students about their teaching and learning. So one pair got regular feedback from their students and said, it's like a three-way conversation now. So we're bringing students into that conversation and then we're feeding that back into our classroom. One participant considered how the classroom could actually be a place for the similar types of learning conversations that we were having in the classroom and experimenting with how that might work, even turning some lectures into conversations with students as a group. So playing with that idea of conversation in a classroom space. Others, it was sharing resources, doing presentations together about teaching. Some people started taking education courses or certificates. Some created communities of practice with other colleagues. Some gave workshops or presented at conferences. But what's the most important thing here is that that ripple effect of informal conversational partners goes well beyond the two people that start it. And I think that is really important as well. So I'm just going to share this little bit of information that we did not ask about. We did not ask people to contrast their other relationships. We really just focused on the relationships they had with each other. But it kept coming up that participants wanted to reflect on the differences between the relationship they had, which was so supportive and important, and other kinds of relationships. And they felt that their partnership created a buffer from other relationships that they may not enjoy as much, but their relationship provided a buffer, had a sort of protective quality from some of the harsh or unpleasant relationships which they also of necessity had to engage in their academic lives. And these situations established even more strongly for our participants the value of their relationships with their conversational partners. And as you can see here, sometimes it's just about people's personality, but sometimes about how other people had negative feelings about teaching and learning and how their relationship offset those experiences. So beyond everything that I've already said, I think there's a deeper meaning and benefit of conversational partners. One person said it got to the point where there's no wall. And many of our partners talked about friendship. I've got some quotes in the left column there. I see the word friend in this literature now and again. I think as academics, we don't seem to like to use the word friend, which I don't know, find that odd, but anyway. But even when it is used in the literature, there isn't a deep exploration of that. It's like, oh, and then we became friends, period. Well, what does that mean, and what is the impact of that? I think that is a really important aspect of these conversations and these relationships. When do we move from colleague to friend? I think we have to take great care with these relationships. They're really precious. They can provide so much wealth of happiness to us. I think it's the characteristics of friendship that embody things like trust, vulnerability, honesty, and openness with another person that you like, that you respect, you might disagree with sometimes, that lead to deeper learning, recognizing possibilities, to creativity, to new ideas and hope, which leads to the possibility of change, leads to the possibility that people in these relationships believe they can be change agents and can make change a reality. So you can see from the quotes on the other side, there were so many rich examples or expressions of the depth of these kinds of relationships that definitely go beyond collegiality, what we think of. All right, to end, I want to share a poem with you. So as Anne-Marie and I started to think about what this rich data was saying to us, I began to write a series of poems to kind of explore some of the ideas that were coming up for us. I'm sharing this one in particular because it was the one that Anne-Marie felt resonated most with her in terms of her experience of informal partner conversations, not just with me, but with other people as well. The kind of conversations that lead nowhere in particular, but end up taking us to unexplored and new places. So I'm just going to read it. So this one's called Weaving Ideas Together. Warm breezes through an open window catch our shared thoughts and weaves them together, your warp to my weft, winding and binding new patterns. Then, stilled a moment, reflecting, we become unraveled again, waiting patiently, pausing, as another thread of our tapestry wafts itself inwards, surprising connection to the first. Quickly, we send the shuttle of our ideas crisscrossing one another in our mind's loom, the floor vibrating, the air agitated now, the chatter of our thoughts disturbing the cross breeze. We pick up loose strands to reconnect and reconcile, and yet our designs change again as each filament of our musings intertwine with one another, taking shape anew. We can talk about anything of interest to you. These are just the questions, slightly differently worded from the beginning, that I thought I would just remind you of. So, what are your experiences of conversational partners that you've been holding in your mind, perhaps through my talk? What value do they hold for you? What influence has that relationship had or could it have for you? And I might actually add, as I've talked through this, what might you do to encourage this in conversations in others as well? And just for the, I'll just show my references there so that they're the video. Okay. All right.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Oh, what a wonderful conversation. What a wonderful talk. And we're looking forward to some conversation. If you would care to use the chat, I'm happy to sort of mediate through the chat. So feel free to write your questions or your thoughts in there. Would anyone like to launch in? Betsy says, what has surprised me at times is the value of even casual or brief conversations.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Betsy. Sometimes you walk away from those conversations, it just, whether it makes you feel better or you've connected in some way. Yep.
Especially when you're having a hard day, you know, like a little bit of lightness in the middle of a hard day can really buoy you through.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, thanks. Betsy's plugging the book club. So email me if you want to join. It's a grand time.
I totally agree with that, Betsy. I totally agree.
I was really interested because we just read Berger and Sieber's The Slow Professor, and we finished last week, and there is a lot of talk in it about isolation and loneliness in academia and a sort of what they perceive as a rising tide of that. And it's something that I've certainly experienced as a part-time academic who's often like rolling in the campus teaching, and then I gotta like sell French fries at a restaurant that night. So I don't have a lot of time to stick around for conversation. But I wonder if, do you think that loneliness is on the rise? Do you think it has always been a part of academia?
Sorry, go ahead. And
that was all. That was it.
Okay. It's funny actually. I was gonna talk about the Slow Professor a bit, and then I cut it out. But they do talk a little bit about the importance of connecting with other people and how important that is. So they talk about it as well. I think it's hard to generalize. I started my academic career in 1990, and I was very lucky to have a really vibrant graduate student group in my department. It was a very large graduate department. It was like 100, so there was lots of community. And I did find when I left that institution and came to Dalhousie, it took me a long time to rebuild. But because I had that, I looked for it. I guess I've always looked for it. I guess I like talking to people. I guess that's the bottom line. So I'm always looking for people, and and Emery was too, very interested um, in fact, when she passed away, I was really struck by how many people said she was interested in me. She was interested
Mm,
in learning about me. And I think when you have somebody like that that goes backwards and forwards with you, she did say when we first met, that she had been very lonely. And I guess I've been fortunate to always connect with people one way or the other. Have to say, without her, it does feel lonely. So um, now I have to follow my own advice and look for new conversational partners. But I think the pandemic for some people has gelled. Like, people have made an effort to connect more, and for others
mm.
people it has been even more isolating. So that's another component.
Great. Barbara shared that she had a great ongoing conversation during grad school, but it's not being nurtured at the moment. We called it an academic friendship. And I do think that I think this transition out of grad school where there's regular meetings and time with your mentors, and that's a particularly difficult time to reshape your conversational life.
Yeah, we spoke to a pair who met through a job interview. One was interviewing the other, like one was on the committee and one was not. But they
Mm,
both reflected on how lonely they felt after graduate school. They'd had a very good cohort of friends in graduate school, and that actually was one of the things that's triggered them meeting and coming together, because they were looking to recreate that graduate student experience, and they specifically said about that. Which does suggest that we should try to spend time supporting people who are new to our departments. Yeah.
I will say I'm gonna do a shameless plug, which is that if you're within the Maple League, we are starting a little community of practice for new faculty, just to meet one another and have an opportunity to talk with each other. So I'm trying to capture as many as I can. So if you know of someone who's new to your department, please let me know so that I can make sure that we can connect them with one another. It's a great question from Melanie. Melanie, would you like to speak it aloud, or I could read it for you? Either way.
Um, so my colleague Meg Steinweg is in this call as well. And one of the challenges that we're facing at our teaching center is, how do we get people involved in these conversations when they've never been involved before, or maybe they were 30 years ago and they don't really care now? How do you, any ideas on how to help people learn that this is valuable?
Mhm.
That's it. You know what? That is like the age-old education developer question. How do you get people involved who don't want to be involved? How do you get people involved that should be involved and still don't want to be involved? Um, I don't know if I have an answer to that, other than that I would say sometimes it's sad, but sometimes it's taken people to come to rock bottom, to come into our center and say, things like, my department chair says I might lose my job if I can't turn my teaching around.
Mm,
Or I am so desperately miserable and unhappy. Had somebody say to me once, I go home and it's like I live in my cave. I can still think about it, because it was so sad. Like, that person had been a high level researcher, and their research had tailed off, and they were being given teaching as punishment, more teaching because they weren't doing enough research. God, that's not the answer. But so when I shamelessly took advantage of when people came in. It's like, that is the moment, because they're kind of desperate, looking for something. So there's definitely that, but I think um, I think in the center at Dalhousie, I think one of the things that we collectively believe in as a group is the power of building relationships and partnerships with faculty, and we do it everywhere we can. And sometimes people say, oh, workshops so much better because you can hit more people. It's like, yes, but then they go away again. We really do feed that in one relationship at a time, because what I have found over the 20 years I've been in the center at Dal is that one relationship lends to another and to another, and then they send someone else, and next thing you know, you've got people in departments talking. I think if you can get one or two people engaged and send them back into their department, that can make a big difference too, because it doesn't just have to be about you as an educational developer. It's about I guess sort of charging people up to take that forward. So I think that's another way that's maybe more positive than the person who is in desperate straits. But that is a way as well. Yeah. Have you found anything that's helpful yourself?
Meg and I are both new to this position, so we haven't tried anything yet.
Where are you at?
We're at Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia.
Okay.
But it looks like, Erin, you might have something to suggest.
Yeah, I had a suggestion on that front. I find that a lot of faculty don't think that their idea is that special or earth-shattering, and so they don't want to share it. But if you talk to someone, you'll hear that they have a really good idea. And so if educational developers can kind of give them a platform. So sometimes I'll be talking with someone, and they'll just tell me this one little thing they do that is really great. And I'm like, I always wanted to know how to solve that problem. And then I'll often make an effort to mention that to our educational developer and say, can you make a platform for so-and-so to tell their really good idea? And then maybe put a call out saying, we're going to be doing a session on, like peer evaluation, and we're going to be hearing from so-and-so and what they did this year. Anyone else had a success or a big flop on peer evaluation, come and join. And then the person who's been invited often is like, oh no, I don't know what Erin was saying. Like, it's not really that big an idea, but they usually the educational developer will say, no, this sounds great. And so then they'll say, and of course, people are very responsive and excited and ask questions, and then other people come. And the more platforms and spaces we create for that, I think people are like, oh, if that's what's part of educational teaching exchange, I thought it was something, like pre-test, post-test, big, shift in the understanding. I didn't know it could just be like this. Then more people will join. So I do feel like there's a lot of people who have these great ideas, and we just need to kind of find them and draw them in, and then create a little platform for them. So that was my idea.
It's a really great point. It's certainly something we've done for years, and I think that at the heart of what you said at the beginning, finding someone to share the idea with in the first place, for someone to say, oh my God, that's a great idea. Yeah.
One of the things that Meg and I are looking to do right now is start a newsletter for our teaching center, just a monthly, like one pager. And have any of you tried that? We're going to try it. Who knows if it's going to work or not, but like a list of here's the workshop type stuff, here are the book clubs that we're doing, but then also having those spaces maybe as a platform for this person in econ is doing ungrading. Here's what's happening. Just like little blurbs. Has anybody done that? Does it work?
I think in my career, I've seen every iteration of that. And I think it's about not just one thing. So, it can be, right now we have a newsletter, for example, that comes out from our AVPA, that goes out to the whole university, and it does the sort of like, here's some stuff coming up, and here's some things you might want to think about. It gives some profile for the center, but we have a blog that used to be a sort of more evidence-based newsletter. Before that, it was more kind of like a one-pager thing, and I think we've sort of morphed with the changing times of our institution. And I think that is really key. Like, what is going to work at your institution? What are the communication platforms that people connect into most readily? And the other thing is, going back to Erin's point, is how can you get not just you, but other people to share things in? Because then it becomes an online kind of conversation as well.
Could I offer a piece of advice, Melanie, that I've been doing now? I work entirely online, and so I think it could work in person as well. But often when we host groups, there is this time, which you may have noticed at the beginning, where there's 5 minutes of people drifting in, and I'm sort of like doing a little song and dance. And rather than doing that, especially for groups that met, kind of frequently, I would just create breakout rooms and be like, oh, Erin, hello. Melanie, hello. I'm sending you guys a breakout room. Here's something you could talk about, or talk about whatever. And I would sort of bust them off into pairs. And we heard that really good conversations got started there that carried on elsewhere. And I think even in person, rather than just like milling about, you could just do introductions. There's a great book called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. She's an Indian American woman, and a party planner, but she talks about how to sort of guide people into getting conversations started when they're strangers or when they don't know each other as well. And I found real success in that.
Thank you.
Yes, as many introductions as you can make, the better. Yeah, that's awesome too.
Any other thoughts or questions or responses to those prompts? Well, I've got a whole list. So you talked about happenstance being really the key, and you were like, I'm sad to say, are there things that we can do to increase our odds or to create opportunities for happenstance?
Yeah, I think all the things that we've just talked about, and I think that raising to consciousness, like even if you're bringing together a workshop on X topic, you can say, hey, and don't forget, you might meet someone in the studio to follow up with them. Like, you can bring it to consciousness for other people in that way. But really, I mean, any opportunity of people coming together. The job interview one, that came up 3 times. It's like, job interviews, like that one would never have occurred to me, but turned to whether the person got the job or not, even. Which was really interesting. Anything that brings people together, Neil, I think, yeah.
Great. If you could wave a magic wand at your institution, do you think that there is something that would help people to connect, to find those connections? And not just within your role, but like if you were the king of Dalhousie, or the queen of Dalhousie, if you will, pardon me. I'm trying to get at sort of some of the institutional barriers that are in the way of these things, because I think, as they say in The Slow Professor, we're sort of encouraged not to waste time in those ways.
It was something I was going to say, and then I cut it from my talk. But it's something that I've noticed over my career. So when I was a graduate student, undergraduate and graduate student, so the 80s and 90s, what really fascinated and interested me about the academic world was just how much time people spent talking. Just talking. And I love that because, to me, that's the heart of academic life, because if you don't have that, how are you going to build and grow? And one of the things I think I've noticed as we moved into the 21st century is that people are too busy to talk, and that makes me so sad. I'm like, oh yeah, we should get together and meet. Like, let's plan a meeting. And Anne-Marie used to say to me, oh my God, let's not plan a meeting. And she would just like drop by my office randomly it was convenient for her, I must admit, sometimes. But it forced that sense of it forced a sense of happenstance and meandering conversation and no purpose. And I don't know, institutionally, I mean, this is my own personal opinion, really, but there's so much emphasis on getting stuff done. Sometimes we miss, I think, the the most important part, which is not so much the getting the stuff done, but the journey along the way, right? Like
Hmm.
how we get there and who we talk to about it and whose ideas inform our ideas and who supports us when we fail miserably at something and picks us up, it helps us pick us up again, like all those things. And all the opportunities that we've discussed that um, that provide opportunities for people. But again, I mean, I think we have to explicitly say to people, like I'm doing here, look for somebody, and it doesn't. People we talked to had a really key person, but they also had other people. Obviously, it wasn't like it was this is one person, no one else. So different people provide different things. But what interests me, I think, the most is that, and every now and again it raises up in the university, we need a mentoring program. It's like, I was involved in a mentoring program early on in Dal. It was already established when I came into the center, and it worked for some people and worked for others. And again, there was that happens. It doesn't matter how carefully you pair people up. There is something about the way human beings interconnect with one another that it's really, really hard to plan it. That doesn't mean, though, I think that we can't provide sort of informal opportunities for people to chit
Hmm.
chat and get to know each other. So I think one of the things that we've tried hasn't worked very well at Dal, and I think maybe because we're a research institute and people think that that's not a good use of their time, but opportunities for informal conversations for new academic faculty. It's frustrating because I think to myself, I know how much they could benefit from it, but they can't see it. So it's like, how do you get them to see what I can see now, 30 years down the road, that they can't see when they're just 5 years in? I'd love the answer to that one.
Great. Does anyone have it?
Yeah, please.
Please put your hand up. Betsy suggested walking meetings instead of sitting meetings, or kind of, moving meetings in whatever way. I think that's beautiful. Hard to institute on a like institutional level, but really smart.
Well, just on that note, Amory and I used to take road trips together, and she used to say to me, when you have teenagers, Suzanne, you want to be in the car lots with them because they'll talk a lot more if they're not looking at you. They're looking where they're going, and a walking meeting is the same thing. It's
Hmm.
really true. People will say more than they actually necessarily might mean to say if they're sitting in your office looking at your face.
Right. I love that. Danielle shared mentoring also has a power and balance. I think informal conversations like what you're suggesting happen when people feel mutual respect as equals.
Absolutely. That's bang on. Yeah. I totally agree with that. And that's not to say that um, a mentoring relationship where someone has more experience and they're trying to support you in can't be useful. It's just a different kind of thing.
Yes. Danielle, would you like to add? I see your hand.
Yeah, sure. I'm not going to turn my camera on because I don't want you guys to see my hair right now. It's a hot mess. Um, but I really appreciate this discussion. And as someone who does sort of put together workshops and mini conferences and things for faculty so that we can discuss, all the things that there are to discuss in academia, I struggle with a lot of the things you brought up, namely providing space and opportunities for people to speak to each other informally outside of, here are the specific things we're going to look at in this workshop, but, more just about your personal practice. And because I have found, and this, it's a little frustrating as the person who's offering the workshop, the more valuable conversations sometimes happen in the 5 minutes between the workshop when the faculty are talking to each other. And like, I just remember this one instance where we were saying like, oh, you could do this. And one faculty member was like, that doesn't make sense. I would never do that. And another faculty member said, oh yeah, I've done that. And here's how I've done it. And here's how it was successful. And they like they didn't care what I had to say anymore. They were more interested in, you know, this other faculty member and how it had shaken out with them. So, you know, it is a real struggle when you're trying to create a space for faculty to talk about, like I said, all the things there are to talk about, and you're almost trying to find a way to like trick them into taking the time to talk to each other in your planning. Like, okay, there's a 10-minute break here, and you're like, how can I get them to talk to each other? And you don't really want to advertise like, oh, there's a half hour where there's no agenda and it's just to talk, because they'll see that as a waste of time. So it's like, it's wild to figure out. So I really sympathize with what Melanie and Aaron were talking about, and the struggle of like trying to figure out how to give that opportunity, but also how to have people recognize its value.
I want to say something there in respect to this conversation. Emery and I talked about it a lot, about the value of experience. I was really fortunate. I came from the humanities. I had a faculty career for 7 years. Then I moved into educational development, where I then taught graduate students, teaching and learning. So I continually have my own teaching practice. And I have to say that I can say the literature says a million times, but when I say, well, I had this experience and I did this, people listen in a way that they don't when I say the literature says this. It's odd for a research community, but that is truly what I find to be the case. So I cheer you on in your continued efforts to provide time for people to talk. I think you should keep doing it. Even if it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, it's awesome. Provide some food.
Great. Love it. Well, I think it's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you everyone for taking part and for taking part in the chat so well. I really appreciate it.